And coming up on this week's show, East Coast Main Line December timetable changes. Are fewer stops a good thing? We find out more about how Network Rail is spending its money with its suppliers. And Scotland announces electrification of Fife and Borders. Richard. Welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Jolly good. Well, lot to talk about. Let's dive straight in. And our main story this week is the formal publication of the December 2025 timetable for the East Coast Main Line. Long awaited. More than just LNER, of course. Much more. Go via Thameslink services to Cambridge and Peterborough. Cross-country services north of Doncaster all the way to Edinburgh. Services which bisect, good word, the East Coast Main Line, such as Transpennine and Northern. Open access services and, critically, freight all get affected by this. Excuse me. Now, regular followers of the railway will recall the utter fiasco of the May 2018 timetable change, which was a total disaster, and everyone will be determined to ensure that that doesn't happen again. Richard, you've had a chance to delve into the detail that you love. What have you gleaned? And there's a good word, gleaned.
It's a good word. Yeah, look, I've had a chance to look into this, and I've also had a chance to chat with Network Rail just to understand the background to a lot of this. They were really very helpful. There's also a very useful microsite, like a little website that they've created, and we'll put it's just ECML timetable, but we'll put the link to that on our website so people can find that. Now, what we've not done, Nigel, is going through absolutely every single change because there's, quite. But all the key changes are set out on that microsite. Now, there are inevitably some losers in this process, right? And as you can expect, the briefing tends to focus more on the positives, right? And that's understandable. Well, I'd have done exactly the same, right? But overall, I think they've actually structured this pretty well. And what we'll do now is we'll just go through some of the kind of key messages, if you like, and see what some of the themes are. Let's start with LNER, because although you said at the beginning there, it's about much more than that, and you're right, LNER is still kind of the backbone of this, if you like, because it is the principal long distance operator on the route.
Well, isn't it always the case with timetables that the Class A trains need to be first on the graph and everything else flows around them?
Yeah, the Class 1s. So no, absolutely. So it should be. It should be done that way, and that's how the West Coast Main Line timetable was done as well. And that's where you get some of this, sort of issues with some people feeling they haven't done quite so well.
Okay.
And it's really London, Peterborough, York, Newcastle, Edinburgh that drives this. What is this timetable about? Not just LNERs, by the way, this whole change. It's about money. It's about driving as much revenue as possible off the back of £4 billion worth of infrastructure investment over the past number of years. So this is about maximizing revenue. Let's be under no illusion about that. So what happens for LNER? Well, they basically divide it into service groups. So there's a fast path an hour to Edinburgh, which is where the calling pattern is York and Newcastle. There's what we call a semi-fast path per hour to Edinburgh, which calls at Peterborough, Newark, Doncaster, York, Darlington, Newcastle, Alnmouth and Berwick. There's a King's Cross to Newcastle every hour, which is sort of a new one, and that's Stevenage, Grantham, York, Northallerton, Darlington and Durham.
Okay.
And then every other hour, there's a London King's Cross to York, so it's 2 hourly, right? Which is Peterborough, Retford, Doncaster. Now, interestingly, that York service will go to Middlesbrough, extended beyond York every 2 hours when the works at Middlesbrough are completed, right? So that's going to be very important for Middlesbrough. And then there are other services, for instance, going to there's the Leeds service.
Leeds,
absolutely critical.
That's the beating heart, isn't it?
Well, to an hour. And actually, what LNER wanted was in every alternate hour, a third. So if you like, 2.5. They didn't get it. And they didn't get it because Doncaster to Leeds is what's classified as congested infrastructure. So that's been something that LNER didn't get and would have driven more revenue for sure. And in certain hours, they go on to Harrogate and Bradford.
Oh, yeah, okay.
There's then, you've got your Lincoln service on top of that, but and I think that's every other hour again. So it's like the York one. And that's basically the sort of timetable pattern. So there's now more trains. There's that extra Newcastle. Although LNER do get their additional path, it's the stopping pattern that's going to cause some issues for some places, right? And some intermediate stations do see a diminution in the service. So you've got places like Berwick, Alnmouth, Morpeth, Durham, Retford, Stevenage, which has generated a lot of noise. There is, and we'll maybe come back to this, a phased introduction. So there are some things where, for instance, in the PM, the service that went from London to Leeds, which then went on to Harrogate, won't initially go to Harrogate. So that will actually come out, and it may come back subject to how the timetable beds in. So there is still some, we're not sure whether absolutely everything is coming yet, right? And that's an important point. Here's an important point, Nigel. The quantum of services that LNER take to Aberdeen and Inverness don't change, but today those services are on the fast path when they get onto the east coast south of Edinburgh, and in post this timetable they will go on to the semi-fast path. So if you're coming from Inverness to London, it's a bit more of a stopper than what it used to be. So look, that's a broad view of the LNER service. As I say, it's about driving revenue, and as a result, some of the intermediate stations definitely get a different service to the one they've got today.
Yes, I mean, Retford barely features there. This is not a new process, is it, Richard? This has been going on since railways were, very young, that if you want to get from end to a railway as quickly as possible, you can't stop halfway, can you? That makes sense. And that's what's led us to places like Milton Keynes having an awful service, isn't it? But if you want to get to Manchester in 2 hours, you can't keep stopping. And we get that here. Also, there's an element of the HS2 cancellation here with Rishi Sunak, isn't there? Because at the time that was cancelled, just about every commentator, you, me, William Barter, Gareth Dennis, were all saying that these services, not if you don't have them on the fast line, they're going to have to spend money on the East Coast, which will become more congested result. And here it is. Thank you, Rishi.
I would never normally defend Rishi Sunak, but I don't think that the December 25 timetable is necessarily because of that decision.
But it's made it more difficult because you can't because it's congested and all the fast services haven't gone somewhere else.
Yeah, but the eastern leg of HS2 wouldn't have come for ages yet, and we still had to do something with the East Coast timetable. No, I in the future, I absolutely agree with you. I don't think it's just made that much difference now. But your general point about not wanting to stop too many places, I think is absolutely right. Okay, so take for instance Stevenage. So Stevenage, the civic leaders of Stevenage are really up in arms because instead of having the service they had before, they've got some set down only, pickup only services, whatever, and they've gone fairly ballistic about it. Retford definitely gets a lesser service than it gets today. But here's the problem. Not everybody can have everything they want.
Oh.
And look, if you live in Retford, you don't care about Durham, or you don't care about the service to Edinburgh. You only care about the service to Retford. Of course you should, right? That's kind of natural. But somebody's got to make some tough decisions. And this timetable, I think, for LNER has actually made the right tough decisions. I think we should be stopping less at some of these smaller places, because it is all about that intercity stuff, maximizing revenue. I'm afraid that's what intercity is really, really good at.
I don't argue with that, but I think we lose something as the onward march of downgrading intermediate stations continues. It's just my view.
I understand it, but here's a bit of controversy for you. I don't agree with it. I think in the end, do what it's best at. And, Retford still gets, decent connections. They're just not the same as today on the LNER service. I'm afraid that's the trade-off that's been made.
You're in
There you go.
full-on bean counter mode today, aren't you?
No,
Yes,
no.
yes, you are. It's all money
No,
and
I'm not.
numbers.
No, I'm actually very much in what is rail really, really good at. And I think where you started with this, that really high-speed intercity service stuff should go first on the graph, and that's what they've done. Now, let's just chat about a couple of other things, because obviously it's much more than LNER. Open access services. So all the open access services that the regulator talked about recently, they're all baked into the timetable. So there's, that's all been factored in. So Lumo is as today, although they get an additional 6 o'clock in the morning service from Newcastle to King's Cross, and then an 1842 return. So that's going to be quite a good service for them. Very importantly, 2 of the London-Edinburgh services for Lumo are extended to Glasgow Queen Street, and 1 back. Interestingly, calling it Haymarket and Falkirk. So they do not go via Carstairs, they go by the more direct route.
Well, that makes sense as well.
It makes perfect sense. So I think that's quite a good thing.
I was going to say LNER pulled out of some of their Glasgows, didn't they? Or most of all of them. So interesting to see Lumo moving in to fill the vacuum. It shows people.
And I think they'll do well from that, Nigel.
Well, so do I. I mean, I went through a phase in the last few years on rail going to Glasgow a lot, and it is a monumental pain having to change at Edinburgh. So the idea of going all the way through.
Yes, good. And I always feel it was a bit irritating when you left Edinburgh going south to come back north again. So I think the fact they're going via Falkirk is actually a good thing. Hull Trains get an additional eighth northbound service. Grand Central has got the same quantum to Bradford, but I think some of the services are 15 minutes faster southbound, so that's a good thing. And then the Sunderland service, I think 1 train a day calls at Peterborough. So, so there's some changes to open access, but the quantum is broadly the same apart from that.
Let me ask you this. This timetable's been in the gestation for years, and we've discussed it before, because there were so many people wearing the contract saying, we want this. And as you said, you famously, it really made me laugh that day where it said it needs somebody to say, you do that, and you off. So has somebody done that in this timetable, in your view? Have those sort of unavoidably difficult decisions? You've said LNER didn't get all they want. Do you think this is a reasonable balance of all those conflicting agendas?
Yeah, I do. Because I think if you
is it going to work?
Can we come back to that in a second, right? So in terms of balancing the agendas, I mean, if you look at things like East Midlands and you look at cross country, a lot of and Transpennine, actually, a lot of the changes there are all about ensuring the connectivity issues that are created by LNER's change in stopping patterns, right? So there is a sense of this whole thing hangs together, right? And I can see that there. And, they did a piece of stakeholder consultation. I know that one of the things that caused real issues in Durham was the fact that the morning peak service to Newcastle, Edinburgh had been taken out, and that's gone back in. So, there have been some amendments made as a result of the consultation. Northern, again, it's all about connectivity, though they do get this new hourly Leeds to Sheffield service via Wakefield. And so that's coming in, and that's going to be, I think, quite important. And then finally, Nigel, we shouldn't forget Great Northern Thameslink, right? So you ask about the sort of, does this whole thing hang together? Everything that goes to Cambridge on Great Northern Thameslink will, from 2026, when the brand new Cambridge South station opens, call at Cambridge South. Now, if you think that means every train has now got to decelerate, dwell time, and accelerate. So the entire Great Northern Thameslink leg of the East Coast Main Line had to be all recast to accommodate that. So somebody has sat there and done a monumental piece of work. And in the end, at some point, you have to say, right, this is what we're going to do. And
that's what I was asking.
I think is what they've done.
And that's right. Okay. Well, let's see how it works, because yes, I do remember May 2018, and it was appalling.
It was. And one of the reasons it was appalling was that nobody had really understood the performance implications. Now, do you remember when we were talking about East Coast access rights? There was the letter from the route director for East Coast to ORR saying, look, just so we're all clear, this December 2025 timetable will have an impact on time to 3 performance, right? And I think what's happened is that Network Rail and the train operators have said to the department, look, you've got a choice. You can have more revenue and a bit of an impact on performance, or we can hold on to performance, but you won't get as much revenue. And they've chosen revenue. Right?
I don't blame them for that.
I don't blame them. I just hope that when there is a diminution in performance, and let's hope it is as the predicted model and not worse than that, nobody then turns around and says, we didn't tell us that, because I think Network Rail have been very straight about that and
They
said it will
have
have
yeah.
an impact. There is one final point just to make on
Go
this
on.
whole East Coast timetable, and it's freight. Because everything in the timetable is passenger facing and is obviously passenger trains. Freight have retained their contractual rights because guess what? They're contractual. But I understand that the capacity for future growth isn't really there without further infrastructure interventions. And that's true of passenger as well. So this is a railway now that is pretty much full. And there are places of congested infrastructure, Welling Viaduct, Doncaster to Leeds. And if any more is going to come out of this railway, it's going to need more money spending on it. People have to remember that.
Okay. Now, those who listened to the show last week will recall that we discussed Network Rail's supplier spend report for the financial year ended March 25, the first year of CP7. Key messages were that inflation was consuming more of the available funds than anyone would have liked, plus the need to increase spend on weather resilience matters meant that Network Rail had to reduce renewal spending in key asset classes such as track and signalling, and instead spend more on refurbishment and life extension of assets. Not something you really want to be doing in the long term for sure. So Network Rail very kindly said we could speak to someone very closely involved in business planning to do a bit more of a deep dive into the challenges being faced. So Richard managed to catch up with Liam Rattigan, Director of Business Planning and Analysis at Network Rail, to find out more.
Well, Liam, welcome to Green Signals. Thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us. I want to talk about Control Period 7 and where we find ourselves like a year in. And you are obviously, you've got a big role in planning and analysis from the finance point of view. So you see all these numbers. From a sort of a big picture point of view, when CP7 was announced, Network Rail, quite diplomatically and rightly said, yep, that's a vote of confidence. But for lots of reasons and many factors completely outside of your control, is it already looking as if a year in that it's going to be really, really tight and you might not be able to do everything that you thought you were going to be able to do in this settlement?
I think it's quite a broad question. I think there's always, when we get the SOFA, the Statement of Funds Available from DfT and Transport Scotland, there's an inherent challenge always in there, right? We've got to kind of spend the money as well as we can. It's public money. We want to make sure we're delivering the best we possibly can for it. So the kind of the vote of confidence that you talk about is still with it. This is a challenging settlement. We've got lots to do. We've got a 3.9 billion efficiency challenge on top of the 4 billion we delivered in CP6. We've got ambitious train growth targets, train performance targets. These are all really difficult things. So you've always got an element of kind of challenge, which is what we want. Then to your point about is the amount of money we got kind of looking okay? Are we going to be able to deliver what we wanted? One of the big kind of issues or shocks that we had is after the SOFA money was agreed, there was, as your listeners will be more than familiar with, a huge upsurge in inflation. So between the kind of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, what that meant for household energy bills, the kind of Trussonomics economic experiment, all of that kind of led to 40-year high levels of inflation. And that impacted what that SOFA money could deliver. The money stayed the same, but what you could get for it decreased significantly. So if you look at that, without wanting to get into too much detail, kind of Network Rail, the way that we're funded, about 2/3 of our income that we use to spend on the network to do the operations, the maintenance, the renewals, about 2/3 comes from those government grants, which are in cash prices. So if inflation goes up, you're exposed to that. About 1/3 comes from train operators, those contracts are linked to inflation. So every year they go up in line with inflation. So you're protected. We've got 2/3 of our kind of income and therefore costs that aren't. So, just looking at that, the inflation since the SOFA has cost us over £2 billion, and on government grants for the control period of 30 billion, you can see that that's a huge pressure that we have to absorb and have to manage on top of what was already, a kind of rightly so, a challenging settlement to start with.
So, given that inflation is currently riding above sort of the Bank of England's target rate, and we won't get into a detailed economics discussion now, but we kind of know why that is really, because if anything else, the Bank of England is almost having to target borrowing cost protection rather than necessarily inflation protection. That number's only going to get bigger, isn't it? So do you have a current estimate of what you think the 2 billion that we've seen so far could actually be over the full control period, given the current sort of medium range forecasts on inflation?
Yeah, that 2 billion does represent the medium range, and as you say, it could be worse. So that's using the kind of the latest OBR forecasts on where they think inflation will be. As you point out, kind of the Bank of England, and as with most global banks, kind of targets around that 2% level. But we haven't been at that 2% level kind of for more than a couple of months for quite a while. So and it isn't really kind of forecast to come down for another year or so.
Yeah.
So we're still then left with risk that it will get worse. Of course, opportunity if it gets better, the money then goes further. But there is clearly with those inflations, an element of volatility, and we all know about kind of general geopolitical situations and risks and all that kind of stuff. People still see the prices of their shopping kind of going up every month, and their household bills going every month. So the inflation threat is very real.
Look, one of the big areas in terms of the change in this control period is you've had to move away from some of the renewals that had been planned into more life extension, refurbishment of assets. And my understanding is that because, understandably actually, you've had to put more money into things like weather resilience. Is it not a concern from a business planning point of view, though, that when you move from renewals to maintenance stroke refurbishment, life extension, in the end, it ends up costing you more to kind of get back from that situation?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think if people equate it to kind of their normal lives, you can patch your car up every year to get it through the MOT, but at some point you're spending so much on doing those repairs that it's kind of uneconomical. And that's the decision and the kind of trade-off that the asset managers in the routes in the regions out on the front line have to make. They have to kind of decide what's the best point. Where does it become uneconomical? To your point, it would be great if we could go and do all of the renewals that we wanted, but we know we've got a limited financial assessment. We know we've got to make trade-offs. We talked about the inflation. There is a wider kind of government fiscal pressure that we can't help but turn on the media without seeing. So against that backdrop, the choices then for the asset management have to be to use their professional skill and judgment to decide where can you get the most value for that money. Where do you get the most bang for the buck, which will benefit the passenger and the freight users as well? So there's definitely a point about that, what we call the whole life costing. The fact that you might do maintenance multiple times before you get to a renewals intervention and therefore might cost more is of course something that exists, and that's something that the asset managers look to minimise by making sure they're spending money in the most effective way that they can.
One of the things I have noticed that the delivery models of Network Rail have become more about contracting with tier one suppliers rather than as much direct contracting with sort of SMEs, small medium enterprises. And I can see the logic of that. But again, in a world where you're deferring some of the renewals and moving to that more of a delivery model, which has an element of on cost to it, because you're now contracting with tier ones and they're subcontracting to these SMEs.
Yeah.
Is there not a long-term business planning risk then that if some of these SMEs get into difficulty because the work dries up and they're not there in control period 8, again, that could lead to more costs? So long question, but are you as a business planner involved in those sorts of supply chain decisions? Because they could end up costing you money downstream, couldn't they?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point about what is best for the kind of industry and what's best for Network Rail is that kind of nice, steady, long-term view. if we were living in a world where we had a nice kind of amount of money each year that allowed us to do what we wanted to do, but more importantly, kind of on a forward-looking basis to make those kind of right economic decisions today. What's the cheapest way to do it in the long run? The way that we benefit as an organisation isn't by screwing down the supply chain. It's about kind of having a mutually beneficial system that gives guaranteed or visibility of work banks, contracts to people to allow them to plan. And that's how the supply chain has enabled us to make some of the efficiencies that we talked about in CP6, the 4 billion. How we're going to make some of the efficiencies this time. It gives them kind of a nice way that they can kind of have certainty about their future, how they can therefore invest in innovation and all that good stuff that helps reduce the overall cost. And it's mutually beneficial. At the same time, though, that's kind of set against an economic reality of how much funding we've got available and an economic reality about how much funding we might have going forward. If you think about kind of the economic pressures that exist at the moment, are they likely to get any better in the short term? Maybe, possibly not. There's geopolitical risk that still really looms large over kind of a lot of those decisions that government are having to make. They've got a lot of tough choices. So that's unfortunately the bit that we're operating in. So absolutely, there's that kind of risk that going forward, some of these very skilled kind of smaller organisations might end up, as you say, exiting the market. And then when we might need them in the future, they're not going to be there. And it's going to cost more to reignite that. At the same time, is it likely, this is an open question, I really don't have the answer, is it likely that we're going to get, as an industry, more money in CP8 or CP9? It seems to be very much at the moment that the target is around making sure we kind of grow revenue, making sure we can do the best for passengers. And part of that maybe is moving towards a more kind of maintenance-based approach rather than renewals. And as you say, that shifts the delivery model to a bit more in-house work from Network Rail and a bit less work then that goes into the big suppliers and therefore filters down to some of those smaller ones.
Right. Okay. No, that's very interesting, and I can see how those strategic discussions and they are tough choices, do have to be made, because we are where we are, aren't we? Can I ask you one question about risk? So in the CP7 plan, Network Rail very sensibly put a sort of a risk fund that I suppose I would almost describe a bit as a rainy day fund. What happens if things go wrong? I just think was something like 1.7 billion, if I remember rightly. But the concern's got to be, if I also understand it, about half of that, maybe even slightly more than half of that, has already had to be committed in the first year of CP7. So does that mean we've basically got no wriggle room now for when things go wrong?
I think it's probably worth explaining a little bit, and I don't want to get too kind of technical on some of this, but it's probably worth explaining a little bit about what that 1.7 you referred to kind of represented. What was that kind of put there for?
Yeah.
And there was two elements to it. One was the idea that whilst we're funding on a kind of an inflation basis from its CPI, that's how much people are paying in Tesco for their potatoes and how much that's increasing. That's not really reflective of something like the UK construction industry, which has consistently seen higher than CPI price rises. We've seen issues around skilled labour shortages. We've seen issues around kind of materials prices and how much that's gone up. The kind of the recent volatility in the steel industry and all of that kind of plays into those spaces. So of that 1.7, about $1 billion of that was held as what we call input prices to kind of go. Our costs go up by more than inflation, so we need to make sure we've got some money to pay for that. So when we talk about that money being committed, what that means is that as we've moved a year into the control period, we can see which input prices have come through. We can see what's happened with steel or skilled labour, etc., or general construction. So we've drawn that money down into our future years' plans. So we haven't spent it; we've just brought it down into the plans to spend over the next few years. So it's not that the money's gone. It's just that it's been drawn down into those core project lines. How much will it cost to do this job? How much will it cost to do this? Then with the remaining kind of what I would call rainy day money or risk money that you referred to, we have brought some of that down to cover the amounts for 24-25, so for last year, and 25-26 for this year, for how much we have to pay under the Schedule 8 train performance mechanisms. and that's about £300 million that we've had to draw down, and that's to cover the fact that the train performance targets haven't been met for the first 2 years. We're then, the ORR is resetting benchmarks, resetting what those train performance targets should look like for years 3, 4, and 5 of the control period. We're expecting that to be at a sensible, kind of challenging but sensible level, and therefore we don't need any at the moment. We don't think we need any risk money to cover that. But for years 1 and 2, we've missed that, and that's meant, as I say, we've had to draw down about 300 million, most of which, of course, goes to train operators that are managed by the DFT, and therefore ends up back in kind of DFT or Treasury's coffers.
So that's kind of wooden dollar money, really, isn't it? Although I suppose, freight and open access operators, it's real cash. But in a GBR world, hopefully, a slightly different approach to that can be taken, because otherwise it's just money moving around the system. Or have I misunderstood?
No, that's exactly right. But as with any kind of contractual mechanism, those things are in there. People understand why they're there. They understand they're the rules of the game, and therefore, kind of everybody has to manage within those kind of strictures of the way that the industry works, rightly or wrongly. That's the way
it's good discipline in a way, isn't it? I mean, because it gives you transparency and it gives you accountability for certain areas of KPIs and so on. And I get the discipline aspect of it. And that was really helpful, actually, just explaining where that risk money's gone, because I think there was a perception of it's just got spent, and actually say, no, it's we now know where we're going to have to use it, so some of it's been allocated into our plans. I suppose the reality remains, though, doesn't it, that the amount that's available for genuine exogenous shocks that come along is relatively small. I mean, that's just the reality. And if something comes along, either something else will not have to be done, or somebody will have to find some more money. I mean, that's just how it is, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. So if you think about, as you say, those kind of what happens if train performance continues to decline versus the regulatory targets, that money gets eaten away very quickly. What happens if we do have something like industrial action? That money again gets eaten away very quickly. And as you said, at that point, then, as an organisation, you've got to kind of go through your plans, reprioritise, decide where's the best place to spend the money. But as you say, that's likely, ultimately to lead to renewals reductions. It's one of the kind of places that gives you a safety kind of variable valve. You can't just stop doing loads of maintenance. You don't want to kind of endanger safety at all. That's the kind of the signal kind of non-compromisable thing. So we have to make sure we maintain that, which does then give you a limited amount of places you can go to if you get kind of, as you say, those exogenous cost shocks. And it could be whether that's inflation, and we talked about that as a risk. If that continues to stay kind of high and doesn't come down to that kind of 2%, that creates more problems. It could be in the form of further tax increases. So we're coming up on the Chancellor's budget. There's talk in the media around kind of business rates increasing, and for a company like us who spends a lot on that, that's another kind of risk that we understand why it's there, right? The government's trying to balance everything up. But that's another potential cost shock that we would have to absorb and have to look to manage our way out of.
I think people forget you're actually a company as well. So you have to deal with things like that. You have to deal with national insurance contributions going up. All of those things are still part of what you have to deal with. Protection from those things per se. Liam, look, thank you so much. That is really interesting. I think people, possibly think, oh, it's all very binary and it's all very simple. It's money in, money out. It, of course, isn't. It's complicated. You've got all these factors to manage, some of which are completely outside of your control, but you still have to manage them. And look, wish you very well. Thank you for spending the time to take us through that. That was really, really interesting. Hopefully, we'll be able to have a chat in the future and see how it's going. But for now, Liam, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Thanks.
So, interesting stuff there then, Richard. I mean, some of the stuff we knew about inflation meaning you can't get as much bang for your buck.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he was terrific, actually. And I hadn't realised, inflation now is sort of around 2 billion that it's sort of eaten, and that's even on a median estimate. So it
just let that sink in. 2 billion.
Yeah, just from inflation.
Yeah.
The thing that I hadn't realised that came as a bit of a light bulb moment for me was when we were talking about risk, and I had assumed that the risk pot was actually bigger than it was. Now, some of it was actually really just for stuff that they hadn't allocated at that moment. And actually the rainy day fund, if you like, is quite a lot smaller. And I didn't ask Liam because I thought it would have been a bit unfair on a guy who was really just taking us through that all so well. Do you remember when Peter Hendy was at the Transport Select Committee? I think he was asked about why is the Dawlish seawall work not included in the, in the spending review? And he made the point, and I'm hoping I'm not misquoting him here. He said something like, well, there wasn't enough money to do that, but we're still monitoring it. And, if something does happen, a bit like happened last time with Dawlish, we do have the ability, there is a fund to go in and sort stuff like that out. And I was just kind of thinking about that when Liam was speaking, thinking, well, yeah, but you haven't got, that's to cover the whole of 5 years. So I'm not convinced that the ability to go in and fix too many of those issues is there. I think the reality, Nigel, is they're going to be really up against it on this control period settlement. A combination of inflation, other stuff that's going on, weather resilience, just unforeseen stuff. I think it could end up being a real challenge, which I know is an obvious point, but I think it's going to be really tough. Right. A couple of months ago, you and I made a visit to Newcastle.
We did.
And we went to see the Northumberland line.
Why?
We had a ride along the entire route to Ashington with the project manager for Northern, and of course Alex Hornby, the customer services director for Northern. And we covered that visit in one of our videos on a previous show. However, we also, on the same trip, managed to go to South Gosforth Depot, which is the Nexus facility.
Once we'd found it.
It was quite a challenge, wasn't it? But there you go. We did get there in the end. I was rather hoping you wouldn't expose my poor wayfinding skills.
No, it was a pair of us battling the sat nav. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
Yes. So the Nexus facility, it's a brand new facility and has a new entrance, as we discovered. And it's now operated by Stadler Rail Services, who are building, Stadler are building the Class 555s, the new Metro cars. And then Stadler Rail Services is going to be maintaining them at South Gosforth. And they replace the Metro Camel Metro cars, which date back to the sort of the 70s, don't they? And the contrast between them couldn't be more stark. Anyway, here's a little clip from the video of our visit to South Gosforth to see the Class 555s. The investment in the depot at South Gosforth has been dramatic. It's fitted out with the latest kit, as Paul explains.
So what we see here today is a stark contrast to what was here 3 years ago. So I was brought up in the old depot, which is an old steam and diesel sheds, revolutionary to what we have here today. So again, part of Nexus investment in the Metro was a new depot facility, which was approximately £70 million. Everything we see here today is brand new, state-of-the-art. We've brought modern technology in, so advanced cranes, advanced lifting equipment, component drops, a new wheel lift building, which you'll see, and also an automated vehicle inspection system. Builds the data from the trains and builds a picture of wheel life. So again, giving the best ride possible for the passenger. So what we have here finally is just the wheel lathe building. The old wheel lathe used to be inside the old depot, but because of the noise and the swarf and the fumes, we've took it away and had a separate building made.
Which presumably is something that, that must have a really good cost benefit. You must be tire turning quite fairly regularly, are you?
Yeah, especially after LRA season on the old fleet, because they don't have a modern kind of traction braking system, so we tend to get a lot of flats, a lot of cavities.
Fascinating stuff. It was a lovely depot, and for me, what I found absolutely really interesting, you've got a depot in transition. For the engineers, it must be brilliant to have a fleet right at their end of the days and then a brand new fleet that you're commissioning. You probably only get that once in a career, if you're lucky, if that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
if there's one moment that really made me smile, it was when Paul pointed out this big heap of recovered spares from the old units to keep them going, which he told he'd harvested, great word, harvested from units that were going to the great scrapyard in the sky. So, yeah,
Indeed.
I love that transitional phase. So we'll be releasing the full video next Tuesday, the 16th. So do watch out for that. It is really good. And it was great fun in particular to compare those things side by side, as I said. So enjoy that.
Indeed.
And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us. So first of all, thanks to RIA, the Railway Industry Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. And then an enormous thank you to all of you, as usual, you lovely people who've left us a super thanks on YouTube this week, and they really do help us a lot. And you all are Phil Craig, Mike Ashworth, Graham Webster, Caroline Cleveley, Keith Grafton, Alan Kirkman, Andrew Seddon, Bob Walsh, Rob Staffordian, Stephen Davis, Nigel Mapston, John Kirkman, Graham Whitley, Alistair Rutledge, Ashley Hughes, Zach Shaler, old friend of ours, welcome Zach, Chris Exley, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, Pete Driver, and Ben Nelson. So we had quite a few super thanks celebrating our 100th episode last week, which was really very kind, and we are tremendously grateful for the support. Just because we keep saying the same thing doesn't mean we mean it any less. We really are grateful from all three of us, so thank you.
Indeed. And thanks also to our amazing members who support us each month in return for some special extras. We list all our members and supporters in the end credits of the show. If you'd like to find out how to join them to get access to extra videos, early access to our specials, so they've already seen the South Gosford Metro visit, for instance, and various other benefits, then just click the join button on YouTube, or you can find the link to our Patreon page in the description. So thank you to all our members.
With regard to our members, I mean, I'm allowed a quick ad lib just to say thanks to the wonderful dozen or so people who did in the first comments on the Stapleford scrapbook, which went out as a members video. Some fantastic comments, so thank you. So there you need to, that's why you need to join, get good stuff. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. Thanks to Jim Millington, Nick W., Colin and John Kirkman for sending us this one. The Scottish Government has announced an in excess of £342 million investment in electrification of sections of the Fife and Borders Railway and procurement of 69 new trains. It includes around 140 kilometres of electrification that will enable the introduction of battery electric trains on the route. ScotRail is expected to issue a contract notice for the suburban fleets this autumn, with delivery of new trains in 2031. The electrification is expected to be completed by 2029. Fairly fitting that this was announced the day before the Borders celebrated its 10th anniversary, a railway with which you have had an ambivalent relationship, Richard.
Well, it's there now, and to be honest, since I tend to believe that electric railways are better railways, I think it's absolutely right, the electrifier. What was that? You said the Fife, I'd be worried for a minute, the Fife and Borders Railway. I think, is that a new thing? Because it is both. It is the Fife and Borders, right? Yeah. So they're doing it all.
Not the FBR.
No, I thought, gosh, is that something new? Anyway, no, it is good news. So well done them. Now, this story was sent to us by David Redgewell and John Kirkman. Where do I start? So Oxfordshire County Council has issued a public consultation on its Oxrail 2040 plan for rail, which is apparently a bold, I'm quoting now, a bold plan to improve rail transport across the county over the next 15 years. And the consultation runs to October the 1st and asks for opinions on the council's vision for the county's rail network. Here's my favourite bit, Nigel. It includes a list of 4 priorities that it says are, quote, critical to achieving the Oxrail 2040 vision of a modern, inclusive and sustainable railway. So here they are. 1, Oxford Station, increasing capacity to support more services across the county. Fair enough. The electrified railway, building a zero carbon network for Oxfordshire, anchored by the electric freight spine. 3rd, the Oxfordshire Metro, everybody wants a metro, creating an integrated transport network that brings together rail, bus, walking and cycling. And then 4, propose new stations to support growth, including new stations on the Cowley branch line and Begbroke, Wantage Grove and Ardley, alongside upgrades delivered through the Oxfordshire Stations Action Plan. Now, apparently, these are all going to be realised progressively through the phased delivery plan with specific milestones. There's like phase 1, phase 2. Phase 3 is 2038 onwards. And then it goes on to outline all the phases. We'll go into the detail. What I couldn't find in this consultation document was any reference to what this vision is going to cost. In fact, a pound sign only appears in the document when they're talking about how much the economy in Oxford is worth. And the private sector investment they expect to be made into the region from building new stations. I don't know whether that's like Section 106 or just, agglomeration benefits or whatever. So we asked Oxfordshire County Council about that, and they directed us to their press release to explain, quotes, their role and limitations in this. So we went back to them and said, okay, we've seen that, but I'm sorry, we're still not clear. Have you costed any of this vision, and is any funding in place to achieve any of it, or is this just a list of ideas and
wish
aspirations?
list.
And we're still waiting for a response to that. I have to say, I'm going to be uncharacteristically blunt at this point. This stuff really winds me up, right? I'm not saying that any of those things are bad things to do, but the problem now is what they've done is they've created this sense of excitement, energy, people believing, expectation, and there isn't a pound allocated by anybody to do any of this stuff because they don't have the ability to do it. So they've set this hair running, and literally nobody's got anything to be able to do it. I mean, I do find that, sorry guys, it's pretty bad form. But there you go.
You've been consistent on this. 2 or 3 episodes ago, I do remember you saying something along the lines of, and I paraphrase, there are people sitting in local authority offices all over the country working on schemes that will never happen. Just stop.
Well, I'm not saying this is one of them, but as a general rule, you're absolutely right. We are terrible in this country at stopping spending money on things.
But there you go. So thanks to Bradley Tyree and Chris Gilbert for sending us this next one. DB Cargo has apparently put the historic China Clay Depot at St Blazey, what a wonderful name that is, in Cornwall up for sale, having recently vacated the site. The 150-year-old depot houses the last railway turntable in Cornwall, and both local residents and those keen to preserve the site's historical value are concerned for its future. Quite rightly too. According to a news report in Cornwall Live, residents in the St Blazey and Parr areas discovered the news in the Railway magazine as DB had issued no formal statement. DB was quoted in the magazine as saying that it shifted its maintenance and crew base to Goonbarrow because of the cost of maintaining St Blazey, which doesn't make good economic sense for the 3 China Clay trains that use it. The added concern was that the turntable is used by the steam locomotives that haul the Royal Duchy rail tours, which terminate at Parr. However, we've been doing some digging, haven't we, Richard?
We have. What is true,
and we were reporting what was said there. That wasn't us saying this is what's happening. I was holding a mirror up there before people think.
You were indeed. No, important clarification there. So what is true is that DB Cargo have relocated their operation from St Blazey to Goonbarrow, exactly as you say. However, there is a company called Empower Kerno, CIC. It's a CIC, which is a community interest company. So that's a company that's set up for the benefit of the community, not for private shareholders, right? One of the directors of whom is Merv Orcock, who is well known to people for being the driving force behind Barrow Hill. And this company, Empower, has a 25-year lease on the site, and that includes the turntable. They've just received a load of lottery grant money to start a business of training in the local area. I think that was something in the order of like £250,000. And most of the rest of the land is owned by Network Rail. So people need not worry about the turntable, certainly not on the back of the news of DB Cargo moving out.
So Alstom has announced plans to open its Glasgow Train Care Centre in Polmadie to the public for a 150th anniversary celebration on October the 12th. It's the first time in 25 years that the site has had a public open day. The site typically welcomes 17 trains every day for maintenance and cleaning, including the Caledonian Sleepers and Avanti West Coast's Pendolinos. The day before the open day, the site's first ever passenger train, organised by the Branch Line Society, will give people a unique opportunity to ride along rare track across the depot site. Passengers will be able to board this special charter at Alstom's Derby Litchurch Lane, linking the two Railway 200 sites. At Polmadie, the unit will then be shunted along multiple depot tracks by the facility's resident Class 08 locomotives. Tickets for Polmadie 150, including the round-trip rail tour, went on sale on Tuesday, September the 9th, so whether any tickets remain, we'll have to see. But another exciting event from Alstom nonetheless. Glasgow Traincare Depot was originally opened as Polmadie Motive-Powered Depot on September the 16th, 1875, when they were probably known as engine sheds, by the Caledonian Railway Company, and was subsequently rebuilt and extended for the maintenance of steam engines and rolling stock. So that's going to be quite something, isn't it? Back and forth, up and down all those tracks behind an 08 so they can cross it on the map. There's one. And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, you can drop us an email at news@greensignals.org. Big stories, little stories, local, regional, national, we want to know all of it. And please don't assume we already know. And if we use your tip, we'll name check you when we read it out. We can say no fairer. Now, we'd only do the quiz at this point, but you'll just have to wait because we wanted to slot in an interesting story to coincide with the publication of a very particular survey today that's been published by the Campaign for Family-Friendly Trains. Richard spoke to Abby and Alice from the campaign group to find out more.
Well, I'm really delighted to welcome to Green Signals Abby Taylor and Alice Delamere from the Campaign for Family-Friendly Trains. Welcome both. I wonder, look, should we just start with a really simple one? I don't know who wants to take this one, but what is the Campaign for Family-Friendly Trains?
The Campaign for Family-Friendly Trains is essentially, we're a group of mostly parents and carers who really, really think that trains, rail travel is a really great option for families, or at least it could be. And we're actively campaigning for better facilities and a better rail travelling experience for families travelling with small children, coming out of our own experiences from travelling with our own small children and coming up against all kinds of barriers. We'd like to remove those barriers to enable more families to be able to use rail in future.
And how long has this been going for, Abby? I mean, is it like, I think this is, you've done the scorecard and it's not the first one, is it? So it's been going for a few years.
No, this is our third scorecard that we're just releasing. And the campaign started in about 2020 and it started off with 2 campaign members and it sort of snowballed from there. We've largely found one another through social media and the scorecard has been one of our biggest things that we've done over 3 different iterations.
Okay, and so this show is going out on Thursday, I'm trying to work it out, it'll be Thursday the 11th, wasn't it? Which is the day that you are also publishing your latest scorecard. I mean, Alice, I've had a chance to see it in draft before it goes out. What are the sort of the big key messages that you want people to get from this?
Yeah, well, this year, I think the scorecard reveals a rail industry that remains split between innovative leaders providing some family-friendly design that is achievable and showing that design and those customer service is achievable for families, and then this long tail of operators that are still demonstrating very minimal engagement with family needs. And I think that's the key takeaway message.
So one of the interesting things from this is that the 2 that you have at the top of the scorecard are very different. So we've got Merseyrail, who's a commuter operator, and we've got LNER, who's a long distance intercity operator. I mean, they're very different businesses, yet they score very highly. What is it about them? I mean, I know you can read the report, but just in summary terms, what is it about those 2 that caused you to score them so highly across all the categories?
Well, I think firstly to say Merseyrail has achieved the highest score yet, so they've got 8 out of 10 points. They have very comprehensive family-friendly design, including dedicated areas for buggy spaces. They've designed their new fleet and their network from kind of with families in mind, with family input from the beginning, and that's very clear. They've also got level boarding across their entire network. So there's some real kind of technological leaps that they've made there. LNER is a bit different. It doesn't score, it's not perfect. It doesn't score highly in every category, but it's doing the best amongst the long distance operators. They have some industry best staff training. They've also signed our family friendly pledge, never to order a new train or undertake a refurbishment without providing dedicated space for unfolded buggies. And I think what we're seeing from LNER is this sustained vision and determination and commitment really is starting to deliver results for them.
And is that really one of the issues here, Abby, that some of this stuff can only really be done when you introduce new trains, when you do a refurbishment, when you do a major capital program, which doesn't happen every year. I mean, it happens infrequently, because just the cost and the complexity of making these changes only really can take place when you're doing these big renewals programs.
We recognise that some of the things that that the rail industry needs to do to make rail a more viable option for families are really long-term things, like we're asking for reservable space for unfolded prams and buggies, and for there to be baby changing facilities, clean and safe and accessible for small children on trains and in stations. And some of those things are very long term. There are also some much shorter term, what some talks are calling quick wins that they can do, like having much better information on their websites to enable families to know what to do and what to expect and what the policies are, and things like what ticketing options are available to them, and staff training as well. LNER have a really great staff training module that's really about supporting families.
Can I just come in there as well? Because I think there's another kind of easy win that could come in a bit more industry wide, which is extending the existing passenger assist infrastructure, not to all families, but to particularly parents travelling solo with children under 5. I think they are kind of feel the biggest pain when embarking and disembarking, and there's kind of no one around that you can find, and you don't know where, you can ask someone for a ramp, and there's a massive gap, and you're thinking, how do I get off with my pushchair, my 5-year-old, and all this luggage? And I just wonder if extending that already existing infrastructure to solo parents would be another industry-wide win that would really help.
That's an interesting point. So I suppose really pulling this all together, one of the benefits of scorecards is that there's some are at the top, some are not at the top, they're at the bottom, and is really what you'd like to see next. Those that kind of came near the bottom, sort of maybe having a conversation with those at the top saying, well, what did you actually do? And raising their game. And it could be as something as straightforward as you've just said, but is that what you want to see next now?
Yeah, I think the whole point of a scorecard is to drive a race to the top on something like, anything that you do a scorecard on, but on family-friendly design and family-friendly customer service. And yes, the other part of it is that it also makes TOCs look outside their own company to other companies for examples of best practice and sharing that around. And that's exactly what we want to see.
I love that phrase, a race to the top. I think that's a perfect point to draw it to a close. Well, look, Abby, Alice, thank you so much for sharing this with us. Good luck with the next phase of this. Let's hope that those who didn't do quite so well this time will be inspired to get nearer the top the next time around and engage with this process. So for now, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
There you go. So we'll be keeping across that one and see how that one develops. Okay, now it is time to do the quiz, Nigel. Now, last week's question was this: where's the longest block section on the railway? And I said, don't want to include RETB or anything like that. It's traditional block section between two signal boxes. And the answer, as so many people knew.
I knew this one as well.
You knew this one too.
Well, I used to live up there. I'll tell you something in a minute. Go on.
Of course, right. So it's the absolute block section from Carnforth Station Junction to Settle Junction, which is something like 25 miles. I mean, wow. There was an intermediate box, I think. Is it Wennington?
It was what was Wennington Junction, and it
Right.
survived until it burned down, I think, a few years ago. And
Is
then
that right?
And then it was
Okay.
a beautiful little Midland Railway box next to Wellington Station. But it is a long section. A friend of mine had befriended the Settle signalman, and he used to drop in when he was driving his lorry past and have a cup of tea. And he said one day the signalman was getting really concerned. He said, "What's up?" He said, there's a Class 40 on its way from Carnforth, and it should be here by now, and I don't know where it is. And as it eventually, this is obviously a good few years ago, when it went past, he said the driver was in the cab holding up 2 rabbits he'd stopped to do his snares.
My goodness me. That is a good few years ago, but a great story. Anyway, the winner randomly chosen from all the correct answers we had was Graham Dewhurst.
Well done, Graham.
Yeah. If you could send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org with your address, we'll get your mug out to you. Right. And to this week's quiz. Other than in a station cafe or a mess room, where in the past, and it is in the past, where in the past might you also have been able to see a coffee pot on the railway? Oh, he knows this one too. There you go. Right. If you think you know, because Nigel can't win the mug, if you think you know, answers please to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday 13th, after which we'll put all the correct answers in a hat and select a winner at random who will receive our highly prized Green Signals quiz winners mug.
I still think you get a tsunami of correct answers.
Well, good.
One.
Great. Good.
Right, we've got a good personal news story to end this weekend on, and it's about me. Last weekend, I held a small naming do for my 7.25-inch gauge Thomas II steam locomotive at the NSMEE circuit at Ruddington, the top end of what will be the Great Central Railway, Nottinghamshire. I named it Rose Ellen after my mum, and it was a lovely event. And Procast did the nameplates for us, so I got the usual little extra there. It was an amazing day. There was about 24 people came, special friends and guests. Stef was there, which was nice. He brought her mum and dad. And it had a bigger effect on me than I thought it would. I definitely wanted to do it and unveil the thing, but it's hard to describe. But having all those people there to sort of share in it and unveil the nameplate sort of conferred more of my mum's personality onto it and made it much more meaningful than it would have been had I just bolted the plates on and just carried on. I suppose it's the same reason why people have family get-togethers and weddings, to be surrounded by friends for something special. But it really was amazing, and the railway did a great job. And I've got to put a quick mention in, name check, for Steve Purvis, my partner in crime, who runs the There and Back Light Railway, he's got my engine on long-term loan. He uses it, but he looks after it, and it's brilliant. He designed the nameplates and fitted them and made sure the engine was spick and span. So thanks, Steve. It was a fantastic event, and it meant a lot to me.
Yeah, it looked absolutely marvellous. And those things are very special. They're very emotional, aren't they? I do completely understand. And making a little bit of ceremony around it is absolutely the right thing to do. And what a beautiful name as well, I have to say. So well done and congratulations.
Well, no, you're welcome. It was special. I think the name's, it's also got a bit of Dinorwick and Quarry Hunslet about it, hasn't it? You know,
Indeed, it does.
It was very, and the weather was kind to us. It only spattered with rain here and there, so it was brilliant. So thanks, everybody. And sadly, that's all we got time for this week. So thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, just click the button, and it really helps us. And if you really want to support us, find out about joining as a Green Signal member on YouTube or Patreon for all the different goodies you'll get. But most importantly, please join us again next week for this show, Thursday noon. It will always be free to listen to Richard and I rabbiting on about railways. See you then. It's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
See you soon.